As the pre-dawn light began to illuminate the expansive thorn-studded savannas of KwaZulu-Natal province in northeastern South Africa on April 22, 2024, a pivotal moment in wildlife conservation was already taking shape. Dumisani Zwane, a man whose steadfast leadership would soon define this challenging endeavor, stood in the crisp morning air. Clipboard in hand, he watched as two helicopters ascended into the pale gray sky, carrying a crucial cargo: 4 veterinarians, 3 specialized dehorning teams, and a substantial supply of tranquilizing agents, enough to temporarily immobilize an entire herd of African elephants. The pilots had received detailed coordinates the night before. Their crews had dedicated the preceding week to rigorous practice drills, honing their skills in darting a creature weighing over 5,000 pounds from a rapidly moving aircraft, rappelling into the dense acacia thickets of Big Five country, and masterfully removing a rhinoceros horn with a chainsaw in under 12 minutes, all without causing any harm to the unconscious animal below. In his official capacity as the officer in charge of game capture field operations for Ezemvelo KZN Wildlife, Dumisani Zwane was about to embark on one of the most ambitious rhino dehorning initiatives in the modern annals of African conservation. The mandate, set forth by the South African provincial government and the World Wildlife Fund South Africa, was to safely dehorn more than 1,000 southern white rhinos within a period of less than 90 days. The chosen location was the Hluhluwe-iMfolozi Park, a sprawling 96,000 hectares of untamed African wilderness. According to all available scientific assessments, this park harbors one of the planet's largest remaining rhino populations. The compelling reason for this extraordinary undertaking, as all evidence consistently showed, was a stark reality. The alternative was simply to witness this vital population vanish. Remain with us as we delve into the story of what Zwane and his dedicated team accomplished over the subsequent 3 months, an effort that has, in quantifiable terms, emerged as one of the most significant conservation interventions in recent African history. This narrative transcends the mere mechanics of chainsaws and helicopters. It encompasses 130 years of meticulous conservation efforts, which commenced in 1895 with a remarkable rediscovery of just 50 surviving rhinos. In the past 2 years, this hard-won legacy has been pushed to the precipice of collapse by a global illicit trade, a phenomenon largely misunderstood outside professional conservation circles. And ultimately, it is a story about a fateful decision made by the custodians of the world's oldest proclaimed game reserve in early 2024, when the cold mathematics of survival left them, by every calculation, with precisely one course of action. I am Edmund Hale, and today I want to share with you the complete account of how a determined group of South African wildlife officials, collaborating with the descendants of a Zulu tracker who first helped save these rhinos in the 1960s, took the most drastic possible step to ensure a species' survival. It is also the story of the 18 months that followed, a period that, according to all scientific evaluations, has far surpassed anything previously deemed achievable in modern rhino conservation. Allow me to begin by clarifying precisely what southern white rhinos are. For to truly grasp the magnitude of both the crisis and the subsequent recovery, one must first comprehend the animal itself. The southern white rhinoceros, scientifically known as Ceratotherium simum, stands as the second largest terrestrial mammal on Earth, its immense size surpassed only by that of elephants. A fully grown bull can weigh anywhere between 2,300 and 3,600 kilograms, a mass comparable to a small pickup truck. These magnificent creatures typically measure approximately 1.8 meters at the shoulder. Their 2 horns, the larger of which can extend up to a meter in length, are composed entirely of keratin, the identical protein found in human fingernails. Importantly, they are not bone. They possess no significant medicinal compounds. In verifiable biochemical terms, their composition is precisely the same as the trimmings from a manicure. Yet, over the last 15 years, organized crime syndicates operating in Vietnam, Laos, and various parts of southern China have driven the global market price of rhinoceros horn to an astonishing range of 30,000 to 60,000 United States dollars per kilogram. Quantitatively, this makes it more valuable per gram than gold, and even more precious per gram than cocaine. A single mature white rhino horn, sold in the clandestine markets of Hanoi or Ho Chi Minh City, can command a price exceeding $500,000. Once this astronomical market value was established, the economic calculus of illegal hunting became brutally straightforward. A poacher in rural KwaZulu-Natal, accustomed to earning the equivalent of a few $1,000s annually, could, by taking the life of just one rhino, acquire more wealth in a single night than he might accumulate in 3 lifetimes of lawful employment. The sophisticated wildlife crime organizations that orchestrate and equip these hunting expeditions were able to recruit operatives almost without constraint. The South African government's law enforcement response, by all available evidence, was overwhelmed within a mere few years. Prior to 2007, southern white rhino populations across Africa had been experiencing a steady rebound for well over a century, gradually recovering from one of the most dramatic near-extinction events in the recent history of African wildlife. By the early 1900s, following a century of relentless European hunting expeditions across southern Africa, the entire global population of southern white rhinos had dwindled to fewer than 50 individuals. All of these, historical records indicate, were concentrated within a singular corner of what is now KwaZulu-Natal province, specifically in the area nestled between the Black Umfolozi and White Umfolozi rivers. These rhinos had serendipitously endured within the same dense thorn-veld bushland that King Shaka of the Zulu kingdom had once designated as his personal royal hunting grounds. In 1895, 2 years after the last recorded sighting of southern white rhinos in the broader region, a British hunter inadvertently shot 2 of the remaining animals. This discovery sparked a public outcry, so significant that the colonial government promptly designated the surrounding land as a protected reserve. The Umfolozi Game Reserve, formally established in 1895, became, in demonstrable historical terms, the very first proclaimed nature reserve on the entire African continent. For the next 65 years, these rhinos live securely within its boundaries, slowly but surely recovering from the brink of oblivion. By 1953, a young South African game warden named Ian Cedric Orley Player, who had served in the Italian campaign during the Second World War before joining the Natal Parks Board, conducted an aerial survey of the reserve. His count revealed 437 southern white rhinos. The species had, by all scientific measures, staged a remarkable comeback. Yet, accounts also revealed a dire consequence. The population within the confined protected reserve had become catastrophically overcrowded. Disease outbreaks began to spread, and inter-rhino mortality rates were on the rise. The habitat's natural carrying capacity had been undeniably exceeded. What Ian Player undertook next, in close collaboration with a Zulu tracker named Makubu Ntombela, a man who had grown up in the Umfolozi region and possessed an unparalleled understanding of the land that no European conservationist could hope to match, was the initiation of one of the most impactful wildlife translocation operations in the modern history of conservation biology. They christened it Operation Rhino. Between 1961 and 1966, Player and Ntombela's team pioneered the very techniques that have since become the global benchmark for the safe capture and relocation of large wild mammals. They meticulously developed chemical immobilization protocols, innovated safe helicopter darting procedures, engineered specialized crates, constructed custom trucks, and painstakingly worked out, through persistent trial and error, how to move a 2,500 kilogram animal from one wilderness to another without causing its demise. Over a 5-year period, they successfully translocated nearly 500 southern white rhinos from their original reserve to other designated protected areas across southern Africa, including the iconic Kruger National Park, the reserves of Zimbabwe and Namibia, and the Botswana Wildlife System. the genetic lineage of every single wild southern white rhino alive on Earth today, according to comprehensive genetic assessments, traces back to that small foundational population of fewer than 50 survivors in the Umfolozi corner of KwaZulu-Natal. Every white rhino in Kruger, every white rhino in the private reserves of Zimbabwe, and every white rhino in zoos from San Diego to Singapore, all of them, in verifiable biological terms, are direct descendants of the rhinos that Ian Player and Makubu Ntombela moved out of Umfolozi in the 1960s. By 2007, the global southern white rhino population had surged to over 17,000 animals. Operation Rhino had, by all conservation metrics, become one of the most successful species recovery efforts in modern history. And then, almost as abruptly as the recovery had commenced, disaster struck. Rhino horn, which for centuries had been a minor and largely traditional component of certain Southeast Asian medical practices, suddenly gained widespread popularity in Vietnam and parts of China in the early 2000s. The reasons, according to every cultural and economic analysis, were a complex interplay of burgeoning wealth in Vietnamese consumer markets, social media-driven status purchasing, and the deceptive circulation of claims that rhino horn could miraculously cure cancer. The market price skyrocketed, criminal syndicates became highly organized, and the illegal hunting operations across southern Africa, by all accounts, became disturbingly industrialized. Between 2008 and 2014, South African rhino losses due to poaching escalated dramatically, from approximately 80 animals per year to more than 1,200. By 2014, more rhinos were being illegally taken across South Africa annually than were being born. The species, after a century of meticulous recovery, had been tragically pushed back into a severe population decline. The Kruger National Park, according to all wildlife assessments, suffered the loss of approximately 75% of its rhino population in the decade spanning 2010 and 2020. The Hluhluwe-iMfolozi Park, the original source population for Operation Rhino, saw approximately 40% of its rhinos vanish during the same period. In the face of this unfolding catastrophe, the South African conservation community exhausted nearly every conceivable option. They implemented increased ranger patrols, established specialized anti-poaching units, deployed canine detection teams, utilized drone surveillance, installed smart fencing, enhanced helicopter response capabilities, pursued the apprehension and prosecution of illegal hunting syndicates, and exerted international diplomatic pressure on Vietnam and China to rigorously suppress illicit horn markets. Some of these interventions yielded positive results. However, the majority, by all informed evaluations, proved too slow and prohibitively expensive to stem the relentless tide of losses. The single intervention that consistently, quickly, and effectively worked at scale was dehorning. I wish to provide an honest explanation of how dehorning functions, as the procedure often sounds far more dramatic than it actually is. A rhinoceros horn is, in verifiable biological terms, precisely the same material as a human fingernail. It undergoes continuous growth throughout the animal's life. It can be safely trimmed using a chainsaw without causing any pain, mirroring the way trimming a fingernail causes no discomfort to a human. The entire procedure takes less than 15 minutes per animal. While the rhino must be tranquilized for safety reasons, the actual horn removal itself is, according to every veterinary assessment, no more invasive than a routine haircut. The crucial detail, however, is that the horn regenerates. A trimmed rhino horn will return to its full mature size in approximately 15 to 18 months. This implies that effective dehorning, as a sustainable, long-term anti-poaching strategy, necessitates that an entire protected population be re-dehorned approximately every 15 months, indefinitely. The cost per individual rhino amounts to roughly $400 to $500 United States dollars for each operation. For a park housing 2,000 rhinos, this translates to an additional operational expenditure of roughly $1 million every 15 months, on top of the existing security infrastructure. The Ezemvelo KZN Wildlife Agency, responsible for managing Hluhluwe-iMfolozi Park, resisted dehorning for as long as humanly possible. The park had, by all accounts, become the last major rhino reserve in southern Africa, where the entire population still possessed their original horns. This decision was driven partly by aesthetic considerations, partly by economic factors, and partly by a philosophical stance. The Hluhluwe-iMfolozi Park, as the historical birthplace and biological origin of southern African rhino conservation for over 125 years, held immense symbolic weight. The prospect of becoming the agency that finally conceded to illegal hunters was, according to all reports, something the Ezemvelo leadership team found profoundly difficult to accept. But by early 2024, the grim realities of the situation had become impossible to ignore. In the calendar year 2023, Hluhluwe-iMfolozi Park had tragically lost 307 southern white rhinos to illegal hunting. This figure, according to every wildlife assessment, significantly exceeded the park's natural reproductive rate. The population, in measurable demographic terms, had begun to contract. The criminal syndicates, having largely dehorned most other significant reserves in southern Africa, had shifted their relentless poaching pressure to the one remaining park with intact horns. Ezemvelo security officials, park rangers, veterinarians, and wildlife biologists, by all available accounts, reached a unanimous consensus by early 2024. They had exhausted all other alternatives. In late March of 2024, following extensive negotiations with the WWF South Africa, the Save the Rhino International Foundation, the Wildlife ACT Organization, the Peace Parks Foundation, and several smaller financial contributors, Ezemvelo KZN Wildlife officially announced the largest single dehorning operation in the recorded history of African wildlife conservation. The objective was to protect over 1,000 southern white rhinos. The ambitious timeline was set for under 90 days. The lead for this monumental undertaking was Dumisani Zwane. And on the morning of April 22, 2024, the helicopters took flight. I wish to convey a true sense of what this operation entailed on the ground, as I believe its immense scale and intensity have not been widely understood by non-South African audiences. During the operation, 2 helicopters simultaneously worked across Hluhluwe-iMfolozi Park. The first carried the aerial veterinarian, whose role was to pinpoint a target rhino from the air, guide the pilot on the precise positioning required for the dart shot, and then skillfully fire a single immobilizing dart from the open helicopter door into the rhino's hindquarters. The sedative would typically take effect within 4 to 5 minutes. Subsequently, the second helicopter, carrying the ground team, would identify a suitable landing site. In the dense acacia bush of Hluhluwe-iMfolozi, this often meant a spot hundreds of meters from the immobilized animal, barely large enough to allow for rotor clearance. The ground team, comprising 3 veterinarians, 2 field rangers, and a team leader, would then navigate through the thick bush on foot, carefully avoiding lions, elephants, buffalo, and other rhinos that might be present in the vicinity, until they reached the tranquilized animal. Once on the ground, the rhino was blindfolded to minimize sensory stress, and earplugs were inserted. Its breathing was continuously monitored. The horn was precisely trimmed using a chainsaw, with careful cuts made just above the growth plate to ensure no pain was inflicted and no permanent damage occurred to the underlying tissue. Tissue, blood, and fecal samples were meticulously collected for ongoing genetic research. A microchip was implanted into the animal's body, and a small V-shaped notch was cut into one of its ears for future visual identification from a distance. The horn itself, by all reports, was securely bagged, weighed, photographed, sealed, and transported to a protected, undisclosed government storage facility. Finally, the antidote was administered. The rhino would awaken within seconds, the ground team would retreat to the waiting helicopter, and the aerial team would identify the next target. On the most demanding days of the operation, according to all accounts from Ezemvelo and the supporting non-governmental organizations, the team successfully dehorned up to 67 southern white rhinos in a single day. The teams worked tirelessly, by all estimates, for 10 to 12 hours daily, 6 days a week, for nearly 3 months. By the time the initial phase of the operation concluded in early July of 2024, the official count stood at 1,071 rhinos dehorned. This marked the largest dehorning operation in the documented history of African wildlife conservation, the most ambitious single intervention against the South African rhino poaching crisis since its onset, and the boldest decision made by Hluhluwe-iMfolozi Park Management in over a century. And then, everyone waited. I want to be candid about what the conservation community anticipated would happen next. The dehorning intervention was, according to all scientific evaluations, a calculated risk. Smaller-scale dehorning operations on private reserves in South Africa since 2016 had demonstrably shown that the procedure could reduce illegal hunting pressure. However, the data was, by most assessments, inconclusive. Some studies suggested that dehorned rhinos develop smaller territorial ranges, which might potentially decrease reproductive rates. Others posited that determined illegal hunters would still target dehorned rhinos for the residual horn stub, which retains approximately 20% of the original mass and still holds value on the illicit market. The iZimvelo leadership team, by all accounts, lacked absolute certainty regarding the operation's ultimate effectiveness. What actually transpired was, in quantifiable terms, even more remarkable than the most optimistic forecasts. By August of 2024, just 1 month after the initial dehorning phase had been completed, the monthly losses to illegal hunting at Hluhluwe-iMfolozi Park plummeted from the previous level of approximately 30 rhinos per month to single digits. Between June, July, and August of 2024, official counts confirmed that only 16 rhinos were lost across the entire park. The rate of illegal hunting had, in tangible terms, dropped by roughly 80% compared to the same period in 2023. The criminal syndicates, by every indication, had begun shifting their operations elsewhere. The risk-to-reward calculation that had made Hluhluwe-iMfolozi Park such a lucrative target had been fundamentally inverted. With the horns trimmed down to their growth plate stumps, the value of the rhinos to the illegal hunters had been sufficiently diminished that the operational risk of apprehension or confrontation by security forces was no longer economically justifiable. Over the calendar year 2024, KwaZulu-Natal province as a whole witnessed a substantial decline in rhino poaching, falling from 325 rhinos lost in 2023 to 232 in 2024. By 2025, the provincial figure had further reduced to 97 rhinos. And by January of 2026, the most recent month for which official data has been released, Hluhluwe-iMfolozi Park recorded its very first month with 0 poaching incidents since the crisis began. A month that, just 3 years prior, would have seen approximately 30 rhinos disappear. I want to be transparent about what this recovery has not yet resolved, as the unvarnished truth is crucial. The rhinos of Hluhluwe-iMfolozi Park still confront significant, ongoing threats. Their horns will inevitably grow back. The necessary maintenance dehorning operations, scheduled approximately every 15 to 18 months, will need to continue indefinitely. The financial burden is genuinely substantial. The iZimvelo KZN Wildlife Agency, by all estimates, operates on an annual budget of approximately 1 billion South African rand, of which only 40% is generated through tourism revenue. The remaining 60% relies on a provincial government grant that has faced significant reductions in recent years. The agency currently reports approximately 378 vacant ranger positions across its parks, a direct consequence of insufficient operational funding. The illegal hunting syndicates have not been vanquished. They have merely been displaced. The pressure that previously centered on Hluhluwe-iMfolozi Park has, by all accounts, shifted to other reserves across southern Africa. Kruger National Park in 2025, for instance, experienced an increase in rhino losses from 88 animals to 175 over the previous year, in significant part because the syndicates who had been active in KwaZulu-Natal had relocated their operations to less protected reserves. Orphaned calves remain a grave concern. Every adult female rhino lost to illegal hunting leaves behind a calf that relies on its mother for up to 3 years. The Mvelweni Orphanage and Rehabilitation Program alone rescued 11 orphaned rhino calves in 2025. The youngest, by all indications, was approximately 1 month old. The orphanage staff meticulously hand-rear these calves for 3 to 4 years before carefully reintroducing them back into the park. And then there is the deeply unsettling internal issue that the Izemvelo agency itself began to address in 2024. Polygraph testing of field rangers and security staff, which the agency initiated in mid-2024, unveiled a 35% deception rate among the very personnel entrusted with rhino protection. By every available indication, a significant fraction of Izemvelo's own rangers had been compromised by the illegal hunting syndicates, providing critical intelligence on rhino locations and security vulnerabilities in exchange for payments that, for many rural KwaZulu-Natal staff, represented truly life-altering sums of money. This integrity testing program, by all accounts, is ongoing. The more profound question that the Hluhluwe-iMfolozi Park dehorning operation has been pressed to answer is whether the southern white rhino can truly endure the modern global trade in wildlife products. And the answer that has emerged in the 18 months since the operation began is a cautiously optimistic yes. The deeper lesson embedded within all of this, I believe, is one that I find both sobering and quietly inspiring. The Hluhluwe-iMfolozi Park dehorning operation unequivocally demonstrates that conservation, when it achieves success, frequently demands the kinds of decisions that almost no one wishes to make. This includes removing a creature's defining characteristic in order to safeguard its existence, accepting a perpetual and substantial ongoing cost to sustain a defensive intervention, and confronting the difficult truth that a portion of your own staff have been compromised by the criminal forces you are striving to overcome. None of these choices are clean. None are emotionally gratifying. Yet all of them, according to every scientific evaluation, proved absolutely necessary. The 1,071 rhinos that Dumisani Zwan and his team dehorned in less than 90 days during the spring of 2024 are more than just a specific group of African animals being modified to deter illegal hunters. In verifiable biological terms, they are the direct descendants of the rhinos that Ian Player and Makubu Ntambela painstakingly saved between 1961 and 1966. They carry an evolutionary heritage that was, in demonstrable terms, almost entirely eradicated by European hunters in the late 19th century, and which has now been brought back twice through the patient dedication of conservation biologists. They stand as living proof that even the most catastrophic-seeming losses in modern wildlife history are not always irreversible. Some declines can indeed be reversed. Some species, given the right blend of committed protection, scientific innovation, and the courage to make arduous decisions, can stage a comeback. And in the case of the southern white rhino, a species that once roamed the African savanna in herds of tens of thousands, before the European hunting era nearly erased them in under a century, that comeback is actively unfolding. Not because the work is complete, nor because the crisis of illegal hunting has been fully resolved, but because the dedicated individuals working in one specific African park, on one specific April morning in 2024, made a difficult decision that has, in the 18 months since, kept over 1,000 rhinos alive. Should you ever journey to KwaZulu-Natal province in northeastern South Africa, you can still traverse the magnificent Hluhluwe-iMfolozi Park. The undulating thorn-veld savanna persists, timeless and grand. The black Umfolozi and white Umfolozi rivers continue to carve their ancient paths through the landscape, just as they have for millennia. The rhinos remain too, though most now lack the iconic horns that once sculpted their silhouettes against the vast African sky. In the cool hours just before dawn, when the park is at its most tranquil, you might still glimpse a rhino raising its head against the nascent sun, precisely as its ancestors did when they walked these very hills long before the arrival of European hunters. The rhinos are alive. The essential work endures. The decision that Dumisani Zwane and his team made in April of 2024 has, in tangible and measurable terms, granted this species another generation to thrive. If this narrative offered a fresh perspective on the challenges and triumphs of wildlife conservation, consider supporting our mission by subscribing to this channel. Join us as we continue to explore the profound stories of resilience and hope shaping our planet's future.